I was made aware a couple weeks ago that today across the state agencies had requested that, for lack of a better description, faith-based institutions would help them do something. We have a major drug problem in our state, and it has strained and challenged not only individuals but families, and has created a lot of difficulty. And their request was that and I find it fascinating, by the way, in some ways, and that these agencies realized that where they needed to turn were to people of faith. Even if we speak about that from a generic standpoint, that they recognize where the benefit would really come from. And they asked that we talk about the idea of hope, because they believe that in the midst of the challenge, that there's all the despair and difficulty that comes with that territory, that a message of hope would be of encouragement in the midst of that. That there's hope for change, that there's hope for these families, that there's hope for these individuals. Because you and I both know that, and irregardless of the problem that's under discussion, or irregardless of the issue that's under discussion, when people have resigned themselves to the idea that there is no hope for change, and that there is no hope for improvement, and there is no hope for betterment, then generally speaking, you're stuck right there. And so, though I'm not going to address the problem per se this morning, the Bible speaks volumes about hope. And what I want to do with you today is, in springboarding out of the song that Isaac just led for us, and recognizing that we can reach a state where I can say, even in the midst of the clouds and challenges and heartaches and difficulties, that it is well with my soul. I can do that so long as hope resides. So long as my hope is anchored in a Creator, so long as my hope is fastly attached to that great relationship that we can have with God, I can live daily in the midst of challenge and have it be well with my soul. Because God provides hope in the midst of that darkness. And what I want to do with you this morning, and I apologize that the center of your bulletin is not going to be of much use to you today, because you probably can't read it unless you got the eyesight of an owl. I didn't realize initially how badly that was going to print. But if you are trying to follow the charts in the bulletin, they run in columns. So you start at the top left and you work down the column, and then you go to the next column and work down the column, and go over to the next and work down the column. But it didn't translate well into outline form, and so I just decided to print the slides. And yes, young people, there are 12 slides. Sorry, that's how many there are today. I know they panic. But let's talk about this together. I want to think about Paul's struggles a little bit. And I'm not going to take the time to read all of chapter 17 and all of chapter 18 of the book of Acts. Can I just outline it for you? Just to get our minds on what's happening in those two chapters. First, recognize that Paul's been imprisoned in Philippi. Not a great circumstance, right? In these two chapters, we'll see him imprisoned in Philippi. We'll see him have to escape out of Thessalonica. Challenges and those who were creating difficulties and hardships for him in his preaching of the gospel necessitated really an escape, if you will, from that city. He's going to have to be escorted from Berea because of the challenges that he had encountered in preaching of the gospel. He's basically ignored in Athens. The curiosity seekers kind of came around, but nobody was all that vastly interested in what he had to say, except for the fact that it was something they hadn't heard before. The responses to the gospel were not all that grand, and he's ridiculed in Corinth for the notion that there's only one God. And Paul's in a challenge when you read through those two chapters and you see the difficulties that he encounters in that place. And I can't imagine that Paul didn't have to experience some discouragement, some senses of being defeated, and certainly a sense of loneliness, because, well, as we read in the text there in chapter 18 a little while ago, it finally, I believe in Macedonia, is where Silas and Timothy finally arrive on the scene, and he begins to get some support and help in the work and progress that he's involved in. The point is, Paul experiences all of these challenges. And I suppose in our lives, whether it be related to the topic we mentioned a moment ago, or whether it's just our life in general, when discouragement and defeatism and loneliness sets in, it can rob and deny us of the tremendous hope that God really wants us to have. And it's very difficult at times for us to resolve ourselves to the realities that if we're going to be able to overcome discouragement and defeatism and loneliness, then we're going to have to anchor ourselves in the hope of God, because it probably is the only thing that can carry us through those kinds of moments. There are some serious heartaches and challenges that are created sometimes in life that the hope of God is what carries us through them. Notice in Acts chapter 18 and verses 9 and 10, kind of shrinking it a little bit, but he says, "Do not be afraid, for I am with you, and no one is going to attack and harm you." Now, let me suggest to you, by the way, if the Lord has to tell Paul these things, then I can only conclude that Paul was afraid that if he continues, he's going to be harmed and or attacked. No other reason why you state that to Paul. Paul's fear, his legitimate reality is that there could be some devastating harm that will come to him, and it is only from the voice of God, if you will, that he can be told, "Do not be afraid." I don't know that there was a human being anywhere around Paul that could get the fear removed. I don't know that there was any way to secure Paul in such a way, after he's experienced all of these challenges, for him to ever conclude that somehow from human form that he would have some kind of help and assistance to avoid the attacks and harms that were coming. It was God who would carry him. There are going to be days whether it's addiction, whether it's physical health, whether it's mental health, whether it's the daily challenges of life, that we're going to wonder, is there an answer to the attack and harm that I feel like I'm experiencing on a daily basis? Is there ever any resolve to this? Is there ever any answer to this? Is there any way? And friends, all I can encourage you at times, and I appreciate and respect the fact that this may sound completely oversimplified, but I don't know what else or how else to say it. I got to wrap my mind around the idea that God is with me. And I can erase the fears and the trepidations, though I may not be able to fix all of the problems. I can remove some of the fear when I put my trust and my hope and my confidences in my Creator. In Romans chapter 8, verses 38 and 39, "For I am persuaded." Can I stop you for a half a second? "For I am persuaded." You know what I think we need to appreciate about what Paul says there is that, in some senses, we're in the image of God, right? We're created in the image of God. We have His nature within us. His character, it's within us. We were built, made to honor Him, respect Him, stay connected to Him. When we oppose Him, when we sin, when we transgress, that is not our nature. Okay? I think sometimes we say, well, that's human nature. No. We were created in the image of God. Our nature is to be good. Our nature, our created being, is intended to be that which is right and in relationship with God. When we choose sin, we choose the opposite of what our nature is. We're opposing ourselves. But some still do. We still do. On occasion. And with that, then, there are going to be moments where I need to be persuaded out of that mindset. Notice that he said, "For I am persuaded that neither death, nor life, nor angels, nor principalities, nor things present, nor things to come, nor powers, nor height, nor depth, nor any other creature shall be able to separate us from the love of God." There are probably days where I feel like death, life, angels, principalities, present things, things to come, powers, height. So there are probably days where I feel like all of those are against me. Where I feel like I can't catch a break. I can't catch a moment where I don't feel some pressure from some angle, from somewhere. We've all experienced those moments, whatever it is that might be challenging us, where we feel like we take a half step forward to only be knocked 3 steps backwards. And on those mornings when I get up, somehow I'm going to have to be re-persuaded to not let those things dominate me. To not let those things separate me from the love of God. Within themselves, they cannot do that. Within themselves, no powers, no heights, no creatures, no principalities. Nothing can separate within themselves, can separate us from the love of God. I just have to be daily persuaded of that fact. And recognize that my relationship with God can be consistent. And He can provide hope. And He is with me. And He is strengthening me. And all the things that I feel like that are pushing me away from Him, I need to start rejecting them. And in essence tell them, I am persuaded that you will not win. The Lord loves me, and He is with me, and He is strengthening me, and I will win with Him, come what may. I think about Paul's struggles in Acts chapter 9. You ever thought about how hard it must have been for Paul to realize all of a sudden the weight of all that he had done against Jesus and all that he had done against the Lord's people? I can't imagine. I don't want to speak history into reality as though I know this for fact, but I imagine that there were probably many a night where Paul woke up in the middle of the night with the vision of the people that he had drug into prison, the people that he had consented to have them put to death, until he finally encounters the Savior in a very real moment in Acts chapter 9. And he is told, "Saul, Saul, why are you kicking against the goads? Why are you continuing to oppose that which is good and right for you? Why do you continue to resist that which in your heart you know to be true?" Paul had despised Jesus and His claims to that moment. Paul thought it his mission to do all things contrary to anything related to Jesus. Paul had arrested and persecuted. How many days is that vision of this young man, or this man I should say, standing there holding the coats while Stephen is being stoned, later having to admit the fact that he had consented. And not just Stephen, but so many others. Imagine the heart of Paul when he has to come in that very real moment with Jesus, and Jesus says to him, "Why are you doing this? Why do you persecute me?" And so for 3 days, Paul fasts and he prays, and he fasts and he prays. I can't help but think of how much shame Paul must have experienced. Can you imagine what those 3 days must have been like? As he sits there, eats nothing, and just prays and prays and prays. Recognizing finally of all the horror that he had created in opposition to Jesus. And how in many ways worthless he must have felt. To think that he had done all of that to the Son of God. And how hopeless. A lot of times people have convinced themselves that they're unforgivable. That their sins, their difficulties, whatever it is they have done, is so far beyond the pale that they can't return. My conviction is that if there was ever a fellow who had to have felt completely hopeless, it would be the Saul of Tarsus who had consented to all of that evil against God's people and against the followers of Jesus. There are times that we probably feel pretty ashamed of ourselves. Sometimes we make some pretty bad choices in life. And sometimes that shame can make me feel like I'm not worth a lot. That my value has decreased because of the choices, bad decisions, and poor judgments that I have made over the years. And that worthlessness can set in to where it leads itself to where I just feel hopeless in that state or condition. And though we might be able to imagine that Paul experienced those kinds of feelings in these 3 days that he's waiting for the next step in this process, what I want all of us to appreciate is Paul didn't stay in that state or condition. Paul embraced the forgiveness. Paul embraced the arise and be baptized and wash away thy sins, calling upon the name of the Lord. Paul did not stay in that state because he was saved from that worthless, hopeless, shameful position that he felt himself in. The Savior comes into the picture and salvation is found. Paul himself wrote in Ephesians chapter 2 in verses 4 and 5 that He has made us alive with Christ even when we were dead in transgressions. Even in the depths of hopelessness, worthlessness, shamefulness, even in the depths of all that is hard for us to overcome, even when we feel so horrible, I imagine there are many who feel awful about the strain they've created for their families, for the heartache and the embarrassment and the difficulties they have created, not just for their own personal lives, but for how they have strained other relationships, and families who've been hurt, and communities who have been influenced. And at times even the embarrassment maybe that comes along with that. But through all of that, remember who Saul of Tarsus was and remember who Paul the Apostle became. And through all of those mixed emotions and feelings that you have, remember that salvation is for everyone. And so long as the sun keeps coming up, there is hope for everyone. Because we'll all find ourselves at some point in time dead in transgressions. And if it were not for the hope founded in Jesus Christ, we'd all just have to stay right there in that moment. I was dead, but I'm alive through Jesus. And so I invite you to consider if you or those around you feel, because of their choices and their decisions, if they feel the hopelessness and the worthlessness and the shamefulness, though those may be legitimate because of the decisions that people have made, help them appreciate. I can't guarantee you they'll embrace it, but all I can encourage all of us to do is tell all of them that Jesus saves. Jesus saves. And for many, no, dare I say for all of us, it is the only real hope that we have. Paul said in Ephesians 2 in verses 8 and 9, "This not from yourselves, it is the gift of God, not by works so that one can boast." I don't imagine that the Apostle Paul felt like he deserved to be saved by the Savior. And it's not unusual then that he would come back later and say, I received a tremendous gift. But you know, even the worst of sinners is who God had in mind when He offered this gift through His Son. And though we may feel pretty lousy about aspects of who we are at a moment, don't ever convince yourself, and do your best to encourage others not to convince themselves that the gift of God is not for them. Because it is. It is. I have hope because He has saved us. Go back into chapter 17 and 18 of Acts, and you'll find Paul imprisoned in a Roman dungeon. You'll find him deserted by some of his friends. You'll find him anticipating his own demise. Almost committed to the idea that it's coming. And with that, I imagine Paul felt the same kinds of things we would experience. Paul became a man worried, uncertain, afraid. What's coming next? Sometimes you've got to go through the darkest depth in order to come out the other side into the light of God. And certainly Paul was experiencing very similar kinds of emotional reactions and challenges that we face, and he experiences the same human condition at times that we experience. But again, through worry and uncertainty and fear, wondering how is there going to be any resolve in this? Again, we turn to the hope that's founded in God. Because when there's uncertainty and there's fear and there's wonder and we're worrying, we need to re-anchor ourselves in the final hope, which is the heaven that awaits us. I don't know anything that can erase hopelessness more than the hope of a better place than what I'm experiencing here. Heaven awaits us if I'll anchor myself. In 2 Timothy chapter 1 and verse 12, I know whom I have believed. Remember earlier we talked about that idea of persuasion? I am persuaded that nothing can separate me from the love of God. Well, now we also need to appreciate this concept of I know. This is confidence. This isn't I think. This isn't it might be. This isn't well it could be. This is I know whom I have believed in. And am convinced or persuaded, some translations say, that He is able to guard what I have entrusted to Him for that day. The greatest hope you and I could ever anchor ourselves to is the basic fact that when God says, I will take you home, He will take us home. When God says you can anchor yourself in this promise, know it, believe in it, convince yourself of it, Salvation is for you, it's for me. It's for those who have felt the despair. Yes, those who have battled dependency can trust in the same hope if they will turn themselves to the Savior, can experience the same hope that awaits anyone who will turn themselves to Jesus. And they can share in the same protection of their heart and their soul. Because heaven awaits those who will honor the Savior. In 2 Timothy chapter 4 and verse 8, there is in store for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day. It's coming. A crown of righteousness is on its way. I have hope. There is a better day for me. It may not be tomorrow. It may not be next week. I may have to wait for eternity, but there is a better day coming for me. I wish I could promise that tomorrow will be a better day. And in some senses, I believe I can. From the standpoint of anyone who will turn their heart over to the Savior and honor Him and obey Him and be His disciple will improve their day-to-day existence as well. But it may not erase everything that's challenging a family. It may not erase everything that's causing difficulty to the environment I'm in. But I can get up better every day knowing that even if it takes to eternity, there's a better day coming. And I don't know a single soul that would be in heaven regretting anything they had to do in order to arrive there. I can't imagine ever a regret in heaven. Can you? I can't even imagine that. And so we sang. You've heard the story, right? Of how this song was written. A man had sent his family on a vessel ahead of him, and it sank, and he lost his family. He traveled the same path, and as I understand the account of it, as he approached the same basic area that he had lost his family, he penned these words. When peace like a river attendeth my way, when sorrows like sea billows roll, whatever my lot, Thou hast taught me to say, it is well. It is well with my soul. God is with us. God is with us. My sin, oh the bliss of this glorious thought. My sin, not in part, but the whole, is nailed to the cross, and I bear it no more. It is well. It is well with my soul, because He saved us. And Lord, haste the day when the faith shall be sight, the clouds be rolled back as a scroll, the trump shall sound, and the Lord shall descend. Even so, it is well with my soul, because I'm going to heaven. I'm going to heaven. Brethren, friend, family, there is hope. They say you don't always know what people are going through in this life. We don't always have the ability to walk in another man's shoes. Some people are pretty open about what challenges them. Some of us are pretty closed. And notice I said some of us, because I tend to be that way. but we don't always know. And so let's just remind each other as much as we can that there's hope in the Lord, that there's hope in the Savior. And whatever it is that you and your family, you and your loved ones are experiencing, there's hope if we'll honor Him, if we'll love the Savior, and we'll obey Him. And if we can encourage you to do that and step into His promises today, if we could help invite you to consider your relationship with God, there's hope for you. I wish more people could hear this message, not the messenger. I wish more people could hear that message of hope. I would pray that it would turn hearts to the Savior. Hearts that have been devastated by despair and shame and worthlessness and all the emotional results of failed living. And realize that all of that can be turned. Not easily at times, and not without a lot of work. But with God, there is hope. And if you're ready to step into His promises or return to Him, we'd invite you to do that this moment. Won't you come? While we stand and while we sing.